Streets in Black and White. Well, once again, back at you. James Lee McFarland, Joe Sell's son. People always ask me, why do I always say it like that? I say it like that for a reason. I'm known now in the universe as Gentleman Jim. But Gentleman Jim is just what I do. James Lee McFarland is who I am. I'm the son of Joe Sell, my mother, who I love dearly, who raised me up to be a gentleman. Now, as I spoke to you guys earlier on growing up in different neighborhoods in New York, I talked about Corona, Queens, where my journey started. I talked about the Bronx, where we live, 1340 Prospect Avenue. My daughter always asks me, how you always remember all the addresses? Well, I do. And then I talked about going to Harlem. I was 10 years old when I went to Harlem. And prior to that, I really didn't know what a Harlem, who a Harlem, or how a Harlem was. But my family moved there. Like I said, my sister's father was a superintendent. And so we moved a lot because he was good at his job and he was always getting a better one. But I want to tell you guys, I want to take this time to describe what I saw as a young lad. Walking the streets, living the streets, hanging out on the streets of Harlem. My life is about streets. All my life I've hung out in the streets. One of the reasons, as I always tell people, is because it was too hot in the apartment. We had no air conditioning. So you hung out in the street. It was cooler in the streets. But the streets taught you games. You had to create games because we didn't have the sophistication of the cyberspace that we have. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the digital games that they played. We didn't have any of that. We had board games. We had street games that we played, the different ball games that we played with balls running up and down the street. Oh, we had everything going on. But look at Harlem now through my eyes. When we moved into Harlem, I had never seen winos laying in the gutter. I had never seen drug addicts. But here they were. And when I tell you people that this is a daily viewing, it wasn't no hit and miss. Every day I saw winos, I saw drug addicts. But I also saw who supplied them. I saw the pimps, the prostitutes, the drug dealers. Then there's a numbers game called Numbers. I saw that. You got to play it as I got older. But I saw hustle. But it was exciting. Harlem was magical in those days. But you never stop and think about it unless you live there. How many people live in your block? So I did the math on that. And I figured out on my side of the street, just my side of the street, in a one block area, there was almost 1,500 people living in the 5 buildings. Across the street from me, there were 4 buildings, but they had the same amount of people living in them, minus the lower floor where you had a grocery store, a vegetable store, a pharmacy, or a drugstore. So the ground floor across the street from us mainly had commercial, but we did all our shopping in those places. So to see that is one thing. Now I'm talking about one block, 2 sides of the street, 1,500 people living there, daily standing around. The mothers would lean out the window and communicate with each other. They put a little pillow up on the window ledge, and they'd sit out there, And they holler at each other. Hey Gladys, did you see what happened yesterday? Hey Mary, do you know such and such and such? Telecommunication, they had no phones. They communicated through a window, leaning out the window, hollering at each other. And the young boys were all downstairs on the stoops, playing games. Later in the night, we'd stand up under the lamppost or we'd lean against the fire hydrant and we'd doo-wop. We sang all the songs. We weren't that great as singers, but it didn't matter. Oh, we were doing out there, you know, doing the little steps, bebopping back and forth, just like the big boys did. Because this was the beginning of the rock and roll era, where you heard real songs being sung, where you could understand the lyrics of what they were singing. You knew the moves that the greats made. This was growing up in New York. But I never forget Harlem, what I saw. Because outside of coming off of our block, I ventured into other neighborhoods. Heroin was a big problem back in there. We used to say heroin, but it was heroin. An illegal drug that ruined lives and ruined bodies. And I say this because I experienced it. I had family members who got strung out on drugs. It was a terrible sight to see. And it was in front of me daily. I would see on any given, not every block now, I'm not saying this was every block that you saw this many, but every block you saw some. Every day, 24/7, you saw them. And then you had blocks where they were waiting on the drug dealer. We called him the candy man. You might see at any given time 200 or 300 guys standing around waiting on the candy man. That might be every 4 or 5 blocks. So it wasn't every block, but in the block you'll see them. But every 4 or 5 blocks you would see 4 or 5 guys, 200 or 300 guys every 4 or 5 blocks standing around. You'd look at it and say, oh man, there must be something going on. What was going on? They were waiting for the candy man, the man to deliver those drugs. In the wintertime, when it was cold out there, the corners were still full of 200 or 300 guys waiting for the drug man to come around. The difference is they would create a fire in the trash cans to keep warm. Because they waiting there and they do what they call, they're shivering and they got the rocking, and then you'd catch those that were, 2 things happened that I found out in talking to drug dealers, because I had friends of mine who were drug dealers. Then I had friends of mine who were junkies. And I asked them about what that was like. One of them told me something that in those days I had never heard before, because I was new to Harlem. I was new to this experience of drugs, was chasing the high. So I said, what do you mean by that? He said, what happens when you deal with heroin? He said, the first time you hit it, the euphoria that you get, the high that you get, blows your mind, because you had this foreign substance in your signal that triggers the brain, that you feel like you're floating on a cloud, and it's heavenly, and you're just floating around. That's what they told me it felt like. And then, boom, you come down. How you get strung out is you start chasing that feeling again. You only feel it one time. He said, then you chase it. And for as long as you stay on drugs, you're chasing that feeling. So I said, wow, that's kind of deep, that this is what happens. So then, now all of a sudden, the realization of what's happening to these guys, Now, this is in the 50s when I first started seeing that. And then I wondered, well, who are the guys that are selling it? Now, I saw them every day, but I didn't really know who they are or how they were. And it wasn't until many, many years later that I saw a movie which became an Academy Award movie called The Godfathers. And in The Godfathers, it talked about how narcotics, heroin, came to be. And in the movie, they were asking Don Corleone, Marlon Brando. Yeah, Marlon Brando played that part. They were asking him, we got a new thing, because this was the mafia. They said, we got a new thing that we want to introduce to America. That's what they said, America. It's called heroin. So we can make a lot of money. Now, this is the movie. And in the movie, he was against it because he said it might spill over into our neighborhood. In The Godfather, if you go back and look at it, when they're sitting around that round table, one of his henchmen, one of the fathers of one of the families, assured him, you ain't got to worry about that. He said in the movie, it's in the movie, he said, we will take it to Harlem and give it to the coloreds. In the movie it says that. Because he didn't want heroin in America. In the movie, there was one black guy amongst all of these in the movie. The drug addicts were fed drugs back when it first initiated itself by who? The number riders. The number riders became drug dealers. The early ones, because they were the people who were in the street every day taking numbers. So they knew the people. They're the ones that they gave it to you free to get you hooked. They don't have to give it to you one by one time. You will chase that high. So I said to myself, wow, I know these guys. I see them every day. But I thought they were number riders. Well, eventually, by the time I got up and growing up, you had a series of guys who only wrote numbers. But the earlier ones were the number riders, because they're the ones who started the process of selling the drugs to the black community. But in the movie, they said, don't worry about it. We're going to take it to Harlem, give it to the coloreds. That is in the movie, folks. So if you want to go back and look at The Godfather, it's in the movie. So now I'm seeing drug addicts everywhere. No matter, everywhere I went, I saw drug addicts, I saw winos, I saw prostitution, I saw stick-up artists, I saw a guy get killed right in front of me. I saw several of them get stabbed right in front of me. I'm saying, wow, this is kind of deep now. Because I'm a child growing up witnessing something that the average person wouldn't witness. When I say the average person, that if you lived in Harlem, you weren't the average person. You saw it like I saw it, you know. Sometimes we as they say, we have a blind eye on what's happening, but you know what's happening out there. So to see and to experience this and to look at life every day and see this, it was an eye-opening, because I was 10 years old when I first started seeing this, and I lived in Harlem, and I saw this. And I talked about going across 125th Street, where you didn't see as many drug addicts on 125th Street because that was the commercial zone. But turn the corner, any corner, wherever you went, and you saw them. So to see 125th Street with shoppers, and I thought about the people. Needless to say, I've been downtown because my mother would take us downtown. So I go to the shopping areas, I got to thinking, wow, the main streets for shopping in New York in those days was 14th Street, 23rd Street, 34th Street, 42nd Street, and 59th Street. All of these were south of Central Park. On the other side of Central Park is Harlem. So I said to myself, wow, if there's 1,500 people living in every block of Harlem, I saw that many people just walking across the streets downtown, but they weren't living there. So they would go downtown and do their shopping, but they would go to wherever they lived. But that was a daily scene. So to see that many people walking these streets were shopping. But when the stores closed up, downtown closed up. 42nd Street was kind of a sleazy area back then. You had all kind of red light going on. If y'all know what red light district is, look it up. But you had a lot of prostitution going on around there. You saw a lot of things being exchanged in the people. But once again, they would leave and go home. Where was home for me? Harlem. I go home in Harlem, 4 o'clock in the morning. There's 200 people on the street. Mothers with baby carriages, teenagers playing at 4 o'clock in the morning. That went on all the time. All the time. So before I go further into Harlem, I want to kind of just tell you guys what you could expect then. And guess what? Go there now. It hadn't changed. Same amount of people out all night long on the street. The only difference is you don't see the drug addicts like I saw. You don't see the winos like I saw. They've cleaned up Harlem. That's the only thing they've done, was taken that visualization from your eyes, but you still got the same amount of people. You got the same amount of people living in the same amount of buildings. As a matter of fact, you have more living there now than you had then. Why? Because before, if it was a 2-bedroom apartment in Harlem, they cut it up and made a 4-bedroom apartment. So you talk about very cramped quarters. Let me tell you all about them cramped quarters before I get into it further. We lived in tenements. You only had 2 types of living in Harlem, basically. Well, you had 3 types, but one of them was very small. The majority of the people that lived in Harlem lived in tenements. And like I said, tenements would be a 5 to 6 story, 4 to 5 to 6 story building. And like I told you, in my block, on my side of the street, there's almost 800 people in them 5 buildings. So that's every building. Then you had the projects. The projects were initially designed for poor white folk. We just inherited them. See, people don't understand. White folk lived in Harlem before black folk did, because Harlem was designed for poorer white folk and the Jewish community. See, they were segregated. New York was a very segregated area. So you had poor whites and Jewish communities in the beginning. All that changed, and I'll go through that as I go through that. But that's what you had living back then in Harlem. So in the tenements, all white at one time. In the projects, they were all white at one time. So the vision of what a person might see was black and white. And that's why I call it streets in black and white, because it's mainly all you saw. You saw very few Hispanics when I was initially growing up. Then now you see a lot of them now. But back then you didn't. You mainly saw Puerto Ricans, which were from the island of Puerto Rico, which was a part of America. So they could come and go without having to go through any type of border check or this, that, and the other. Yeah, get on a plane and go to Puerto Rico. Get off the plane and you're in America. So That's what it was. But Harlem was initially white. Now I think while I'm on there, I'll give you a little story on that. Seneca Village is what I talk about, was where roughly 300 free slaves lived. They sold them bad land. It was wasteland. It was too soft to build sturdy buildings on because it was marshland, which means the soil was very soft. So you couldn't put anything real heavy on it. But you could put a house on there. Just couldn't put a multi-structure. So Seneca Village, this was in the early 1825. That's when the Europeans decided that they wanted a park like Europe had. New York didn't have any big parks. They wanted to create a park. So they decided, where these free slaves had bought this land, to create a park that we now know as Central Park. Surrounded by Central Park is none but high-rise structures all the way around on the east side and the west side. High-rises. But this land was too soft, so they sold it to free slaves. But then when they wanted a park, they eliminated the free slaves, told them to leave. Well, guess what? Bordering Central Park was this area called Harlem, which was predominantly white. But you're only talking about 300. You're only talking about 300 free slaves. So for them to filter into this area, now don't get me wrong, there's no record of what I'm saying. I just know what I know. So for these free slaves to enter into this area across 110th Street, which created this Harlem. Prior to that was Lower Manhattan. Well, they got 300 people. They mixed in. These were already people that were on the low end of life. So they didn't care about, I told you, on my block I got 700, almost 800 people. So what is 300 in this big area? So that's the point I'm trying to make. Now, where did African free slaves live? In New York. Even during that time, the ones that were here, and it didn't come to be well known until the century changed. Now we're in 1901 and 1900 that. Negroes, colored people, because there was no African American back then. We were either Negro or we were colored. We lived in an area on the lower west side of Manhattan called the Chelsea area. The Chelsea area was between 8th Avenue and the Hudson River. So you had 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th Avenue, and you got the Hudson River. And they lived in the lower teens to right at 20s. So the lower area is where the free slaves, or the Negroes, or the colors, or whatever we want to call it, that's where they lived. We didn't live in Harlem in no massive amount of numbers. So what happened? After World War I that is, which ended in, I think it was roughly 1918, 1919, somewhere around that. There was a big migration from the South. And the migration came up to stay with Uncle Bud, Cousin Pookie, Ray, came to stay with them. Where'd they go? To the Chelsea area. Before he could blink twice, the owners of them buildings looked up. They were flooded with Negroes. Swelling so that they decided to kick them out. They told those Negroes that lived in that area, pack your bags and get out. Now where these people gonna go? Harlem. Because Harlem by then had became a melting pot for the rejected white people. Now, how do I know that? Because they told me that. Meaning, if you were Irish Catholic, for argument's sake, and you were a girl, and the Irish Catholics lived in the area, the Italians lived in the area in New York, the Polish people lived in the area, the German people lived in the area, and they were called Germantown, Little Italy, Polishville, Chinatown. The Chinese all lived in one area. They were not spread out. They had their own communities. And in having their own communities, if you wasn't one of them, you couldn't get in their community. Well, if somehow you disgrace the neighborhood, they put you out. So where'd you go? Went to Harlem. So in Harlem, in the earlier days, what'd you have? You had the rejects from each one of those communities. So it became a melting pot for people that did something wrong. Let's say you were a young lad and you were Irish or you were German or you whatnot, and you got locked up by the police for whatever. They kicked you out of the neighborhood. They kicked you out. This was your family because you disgraced them. And they looked down on that. If a young girl got pregnant, they put her out. So you couldn't get in. And if I was a colored person, I couldn't live in none of those neighborhoods because they would not allow me in them. New York was very territorial. It was very prejudiced. When I finally moved in, I just started asking questions. Well, how'd that happen? Then the guys told me that came there, now this is in the 50s, told me, but the change started in the 20s. And that's why the phrase, the Harlem Renaissance, came about, because our side of us, our artistic side of us, which was the art, the song, the dance, was becoming popular around the world, but mainly around America. We were all of a sudden noted for the songs we sang, the way we danced, our acting. We started becoming published writers. We started creating records that could be heard and purchased. But we all lived in Harlem. So they just called it the Harlem Renaissance. Is that the way it came about? I don't know. I just listened to those who were there when that part of it started, and he just said we had no other place to live. If it was Brooklyn, it would have been the Brooklyn Renaissance. If it was Queens, it would have been the Queens Renaissance. The artistic part of us came out during that time, and that's why it became the Harlem Renaissance. But we had no place else to live. So by the time I got there, it's all black. It wasn't a mixture. I don't remember seeing any white folk living in Harlem when I first moved there. They did in Queens. Queens was black and white. They did in the Bronx. The Bronx became, areas of the Bronx became black and Puerto Rican, but Harlem was all black. And I'm seeing a part of life that black folk was living. I came to a realization by me living in so many areas and by me talking to so many ethnic groups that white folk, white people, I just use folk because I just like to use white folk. White folk have fun in life. They really do. I know, because as I got older, I started doing what they did, and I said, this is a lot of fun. Black people, colored, Negro, whatever you want to call us back then, we didn't have fun. We partied. Oh, Lord, we partied. Oh, we partied. See, they did things, and they were having fun. We were having fun, too, but it was a party for us. There was always a party going on. As my earlier days growing up, there was always a party. There was, any block you go to, somebody had a party in it. You could go to other neighborhoods and not find a party for miles. You go to Harlem, every block somebody had a party, especially on the weekends. And then you had those that had a party during the week. But they still had one on the weekend. Every block there was a party. I don't know of a block, and I traveled all crisscross Harlem. There was always a party going on. Somebody over 111th Street say, hey man, we got a party going on. 112th Street, they got a party going on. 114th Street, there's a party going on. Convent Avenue, they got a party going on. 7th Avenue, they got a party going on. 8th Avenue, everywhere you went. That's why I say that Harlem, I call it when the magic was real. Because it was magical. It was magical to walk. You just walk down the middle of the street, singing and popping out fingers, doo-wopping the song that the real artists, you go to every other block, you find 3 or 4 brothers standing on the corner under the light post, doo-wopping. In the still of the night, in the still of the night. Oh, we was all over that, see? But then you had the Apollo Theater there, where artists came and performed. Those theaters were originally white theaters. I'm going to get into it later, but I'm going to tell you how the Apollo Theater got its name. It was not called the Apollo Theater. Now, how do I know this? It's because in my journey of eventually ending up in Harlem, I met the owners. Because my mentor, they were his clients. Frank Schiffman bought the Apollo in the 30s. It was a burlesque house. Sigmund something Burlesque Theater. He's the one that changed the name to the Apollo. I never found out why he called it the Apollo, but he calls it the Apollo Theater. Because the mood swing was changing. Harlem was still white when he bought it. The difference was they got tired of burlesque. So they in turn brought colored acts to perform for totally white audiences. The whole audience was white. The entertainment was black. I talked to Frank Schiffman about this. His son, Bob Schiffman, ran the day-to-day operation. Cut and dry. Ran the day-to-day operation. So now I'm understanding a little history about the Apollo Theater. I'm in the 60s now. I'd grown up from when I was a boy, and I'm going to get back to the boy part of me. But now I'm learning about the Apollo Theater. A lot of people don't understand even the help that was at the Apollo Theater. There was a brother. Now I learned these people later in life when I became a tailor and I started working for them. There was a brother who always stood out in front of the Apollo Theater. His name was Neil. Neil had lost his arm in the war. So he had lost, I can't remember which arm it was, but Neil was clean as could be. And he always had that sleeve, was always pinned up where he was missing the arm. Neil was the manager of the Apollo Theater. I met a gentleman named Honey Cole. Honey Cole was a big-time dancer back in his day. Honey Cole was like the artistic director of the Apollo Theater. Most people didn't know who these people were. We did because we did business with them. The Apollo Theater had a comedian. His name was Sam. And they called him Sad Sam. And he was the comedian that kept the audience alive while the acts changed. If you ever been to live performances, there's always some guy out there either telling jokes or telling stories while they change the setting for the next act. These were real people. And then you had, boy, he was a trip, Sandman Sims. Sad man, if you ever see the old Apollo Theater, was a guy who hooked you. If they booed you off, he'd come out with a big hook and they hook you and snatch you off the stage. How did I know? He was a client of ours also. So he was always in and out of the tailor shop. But these were real people. Real people. I'm going to get further into the real people. But I wanted to just basically paint this picture of what Harlem was about. I told you guys earlier about Jocko Henderson and Jocko's Rocket Ship Review. Back in those days, he did the 50s rock and roll artists. By the time I got to working on 125th Street, we were into the 60s rock and roll artists. Whole different scene, whole different setting. Okay, that's when they kind of changed the, I guess you could say, the titling of it, because it was rock and roll and it became rhythm and blues. It's still us. The music, dialect didn't change. All the music from the 40s and the 50s was about my gal done left me, how am I gonna get her back? Or a rainy night, or something that went wrong, but I found my true love. That's all the music you heard, but they were really singing back then. That's when the doo-wop era started, where you had less instruments, so you heard nothing but harmonizing. And every young brother in Harlem has doo-wop at one time in his life, because that's what young brothers did growing up, because we were always downstairs. So that doo-wop thing, oh boy. And everybody, you had your tenor, your alto, you had a baritone, you had a bass, then you had the lead singer. Lead singers was always the guy with the best voice and the pretty boy. He was always the lead singer. Going from the 50s to the 60s, history of the groups. But guess what? Those same groups lived in your neighborhood. In the neighborhood where I grew up, we had members of the Drifters that lived in that neighborhood. We had the Cadillacs, some of them lived in our neighborhood. Further up, you had Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. You had Bill and the Genies. Now, Bill and the Genies was from California. And I met him later on because he was down and out in his luck. My mother let him sleep on our couch and we fed this man. Bill and the Genies. Who's That Knocking at My Door was his hit song. But when I met him, he was down and out in his luck. My mother fed the man for about 2 weeks. He was trying to get back to California. He was from, at that time, the Watts area. Bill and the Genies. So I'm starting to meet all these people. And I'm loving it. But if you could understand, if you could look through my eyes and see Harlem the way I saw it, to us, it was an everyday occurrence of what I saw. I mean, every day. Not a day went by that I didn't see what I described to you, that I saw every single day. Going to school. Started going to school in Harlem. Now, by the time I got to Harlem in elementary school, this is the third elementary school I've been in. The third, because I told you we moved a lot. So now I'm meeting a different type of student compared to what I've been meeting. When I grew up in the white neighborhood, I went to school with black and white kids. Then when I moved to the Bronx, I went to school with black and Puerto Rican boys. Now I'm in Harlem with all black. I didn't have a black teacher or black role model to see in the teaching profession until I was in the 8th grade. The 8th grade, before I finally had a black teacher. In the hood, you had a number of white teachers. They didn't live there, but they were in the school system. When I lived in the Bronx, I had all white teachers. I didn't even though it was Puerto Rican, we had no Hispanic teachers back then. were all white teachers. They didn't live in our neighborhood, but they were teachers. When I lived in Corona, growing up, which was half and half, they were all white teachers, even though half the school population was black. There's no black teachers. And I listened to conversations as I spoke about living in Corona, what I heard them say. They always put us down, that we wouldn't amount to anything. It's funny, I go along in life now, and I talk to people that lived in all different areas who had similar experiences that I did when you had teachers, white teachers, talking about black children, talking about we'll never amount to anything. But we have. Have we arrived? Depends on what we want to say. What did you arrive to? So, I'm going to get on with my story, but I'm going to give you guys something to think about when you think about what Harlem was. And the reason why I said that is because there was a very negative picture painted around Harlem in those days. But because I lived in more than just Harlem, I can tell you when I lived in the Spanish and black community, same thing went on. They played numbers in that community too. I didn't see the drug addicts and the winos in that, but I saw the violence of them. I saw the way they treated each other. Then when I moved to the Bronx, and I'm around black and Puerto Ricans, I saw the same thing. They played numbers in those organizations. I saw violence. I listened to the way they talked to each other, black and Puerto Rican. I moved to Harlem. The only difference was there was no other ethnic group in there. It was just us. But I saw the same thing. The only difference now, I see the visual of the people involved in those activities. I saw the drug addicts. I saw the drug dealers every day. I saw the winos every day. I saw the number riders every day. I saw the bad guys. I saw the stick-up artists every day. I saw con artists. We'd be listening, we'd be sitting on the stoop, and we'd listen to a con artist con somebody out of some money. So I saw those in Harlem every day. In the other neighborhoods, I didn't see that every day. Every now and then I saw that. So this is a picture of what New York was really like. And I'm not just limiting it to Harlem, because I lived in more than just Harlem. So I want to give you guys a view on what I saw with my own eyes, what I heard with my own ears, what I witnessed with my heart and soul. And my heart went out to a lot of people back in those days, because I looked at the way people lived and the structure that they lived in. So, Gentleman Jim McFarland, also known as James Lee, Josel's son. I'll be back.
Gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you at this time one of the finest dancers that you've ever seen. Now, to stand here and make a long, long speech about him would really be keeping you away from a great treat. What? With as many Broadway appearances and nightclubs and theaters throughout the country, I bet you've seen him before. If you haven't, you're in for a great treat right now. Freddie, open the curtains, and let's bring on Bill Bailey.
Little bit of Bojangles. My good friend. You laugh, buddy. Here's what Bojangles costs. tipping down Main Street. I just love this one. That's one of my girls like to see me do. Going for myself now.